Hello, everyone. I'd like to speak to you today about the concept of film as an empathy machine and how this machine can be used as a tool for advocacy. This is a subject that's really intrigued me for a long time, but that I didn't really have the intellectual capabilities to explain until I began developing my career as a film programmer. I wish I could say that I'm from a background where I was engaged with cinema in a really profound way from an early age, but unfortunately, growing up in rural Ireland, this wasn't really the case. I do recall as a child, though, that film always had a profound effect on me. And as a sensitive and quite emotional child, I was always very curious and really moved by the new worlds that were opened up to me in film. One memory that's particularly vivid to me is the first time I saw the Disney film Bambi, which many of you, I'm sure, have seen, although some of you are maybe a little bit young. If you haven't seen the film, I do have a bit of a spoiler alert, so I apologize. But in that moment where Bambi's mother dies, I just remember being completely traumatized as a child. And I know I'm not the only child that had this reaction. But more so than that feeling of trauma was the feeling I had towards Bambi after this inciting moment. Even as a young child, that thought of losing your mother really resonated so profoundly with me, and it really made me feel for Bambi. It sounds very dramatic now, but at the time, it really had an effect on me, and it stayed with me for quite a long time. But it wasn't until I was an adult and that I began becoming indoctrinated properly into the film world that I really began to understand this reaction. And the light bulb moment of connection came for me when I was watching the documentary film Life Itself about the US film critic Roger Ebert. Roger Ebert was he was an amazing man. He was a champion for filmmakers, and he really admired the ability of film to help you transcend your own experience. And in his own words, he said, "Movies are the most powerful empathy machine in the arts. When I go to a great movie, I get to live somebody else's life for a while. I can walk in somebody else's shoes. I can see what it feels like to be a member of a different gender, a different race, a different economic class, to live in a different time, and to have a different belief." This statement really resonated with me, and it really articulated the way I've been feeling about film my entire life. And this is exactly the effect that film had always had on me, especially in the way it helped me to identify with other human beings. In essence, Ebert really believed that great cinema augments and broadens our minds, enlightening us and making us more compassionate, really. He saw film as a way of talking about ideas and having a conversation, and he saw it as a celebration of a humanity and a way to make ordinary lives feel remarkable. As long as the characters are explored through compelling narratives, film allows us to feel empathy for those very different to ourselves from completely foreign worlds. I think it's important to understand the difference between empathy and sympathy in this context. While empathy puts you in another person's shoes and allows you to connect with them on an emotional level and become invested in them, sympathy really only allows you to see things from your own perspective. And Ebert's words really express why this incredible medium is so important to me. While I don't believe I'm as yet an expert in the history and the language of cinema completely, I think that Ebert's ideas have helped to carve my own mantra in my film curation work. My objective as a film programmer is to engage audiences in narratives that not only entertain, but that illuminate and that allow people to forge an emotional connection and go beyond their own experience of life. Now, film, the empathy machine, has really been working its cogs since the early days of silent cinema and has been developing through narrative and non-fiction filmmaking over the past 100 years. It's always harnessed its influence as the most accessible and understandable medium in the modern world when it comes to art. And film, it can be visceral, it can be emotional, it can be a window into another world, and you can feel someone else's humanity in a really deep and meaningful way through film. And stepping outside your own life can really be very palpable and quite a profound experience. Ebert's theory is also supported by science. And one study from the University of Virginia claims that when we immerse ourselves in the perspective of another person, we start to subtly accrue that perspective in our own universe, and that's how empathy is generated. And another study showed that watching and different narratives can alter your brain chemistry. So participants in this study, they were shown a film about a father raising a son with terminal cancer, and their brains responded by creating two neurochemicals, cortisol and oxytocin. Cortisol focuses your attention, while oxytocin generates empathy. And the more oxytocin that is released, the more empathy you feel for the characters on screen. Now, we're all born into a very specific set of circumstances, our gender, our race, our class, a very specific time in a specific space. What film does is allow us to transcend this. An empathy-driven film puts the characters on screen in a position that we can relate to. And film is obviously very subjective, but a good filmmaker will project a world through greys, I believe, rather than in just black and white. And the construction and the execution really matter. A perfect example of this is the 2016 Academy Best Picture winner, Moonlight, which is a film that is just expertly created and realized by the director, Barry Jenkins. Now, while this film pertains to a very specific experience, that of a gay, black, young man growing up in the projects of Florida, it also hinges on a very specific set of factors, and these are the human experiences of loneliness, desire, and love. These factors are really all universal to the human condition, and even though the vessel through which they're funneled in this case is not, they cause an empathetic reaction to occur. In turn, this propels our understanding of both the African American experience and the gay experience, and it can subvert an audience's inherent notions on either of these minorities. Because we're so drawn into the life of this character, we feel what he feels, and we become more interested in understanding his life. And while he's initially perceived as other to a lot of audiences, ultimately we relate to him because we understand him and we felt the way he feels. While you're sitting in the cinema, you really, you are him and you understand what's going on in his life. And to me, this proves the notion that it doesn't matter how a story is framed or filtered. What matters is the way it connects with an audience on an emotional level. So I believe by leaning in on the raw power of emotional human stories, films can have a deep impact and the power to change hearts and minds. This intrinsic link is really important when we discuss the empathy machine as a tool for advocacy. So to return to the original idea of film as the most accessible and understandable art form, I think it stands to reason that this machine can be harnessed for advocacy, to make an impact, to spark initiative, to be an agent or a catalyst for change. This can be really as simple as inspiring an idea and supporting discourse or encouraging critical and empathetic thinking about the world. And to my mind, there are 3 E's which can be combined in cinema, whose intersection creates the perfect breeding ground for advocacy. And these are films which entertain, emote, and educate. There's no denying that when these 3 factors coalesce, advocacy can thrive, and that an emotional impact can provoke a social impact. If you take the recent marriage equality and abortion rights campaigns in Ireland, the films which you might have seen that were created for these movements, they were tools for advocacy, and they sparked empathy by the viewers. And I think that this really helped in swaying the campaigns. And this kind of idea is something that is of paramount importance to my work with Gaze Film Festival. The Manifesto of Gaze is about the power of LGBT stories to create an inclusive environment through a program that seeks to provoke thought, to inspire change, and has intrinsic links to advocacy. For example, in advance of the 2015 marriage equality referendum in Ireland, the festival toured a US documentary entitled The Case Against 8 regionally around Ireland. Now, this film told the story of same-sex couples in California that were fighting to have their marriages recognized. And its direct correlation with our own campaign created the perfect platform for advocacy. This was funneled through the aforementioned empathy machine, and it stimulated more discourse around the Yes campaign regionally around Ireland. I'm also involved with advocacy screenings and events through my work with Cork Film Festival, most specifically through our Illuminate mental health programme. Illuminate uses film to explore aspects of mental health and well-being and offers personalised dialogues around mental health in a very open and a very welcoming space. This has proved really successful for the festival, and the portrayals of mental health on screen have really done a lot to destigmatise the sometimes very difficult conversations that we have around mental well-being. And while it can be difficult to quantify the impact that these kinds of films and screening events and discussions can have, for me, I've certainly been able to qualify them through the conversations and discussions that I've had with audience members post-screenings at both Gaze and Cork Film Festival. And I really truly believe that these kinds of film screenings and discursive events work incredibly well as an empathetic engine for advocacy. And as I've discussed, empathy provokes advocacy, and advocacy provokes action. So I'd just like to end with another quote, this time from the independent film producer Ted Hope, who's a man that I really admire, who recently said, "Cinema is an empathy machine. We need it now more than ever. The more it captures that unique ability to help us walk in someone else's shoes, the more it is going to resonate with audiences. To my mind, in these socially precarious times, we need to harness this great machine for good." So whether the empathy machine encourages you to become more politically or socially active, to use art for advocacy, or even to curate your own film series for your community to help broaden their minds and educate, I would really encourage you to use your own specific set of tools to make an impact. Thank you.